Hey everybody, welcome to the I303 podcast where we share ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Today I have Brandon with me and we're going to be talking about AI and leadership. And do those two still come together? So without further ado, Brandon, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and tell us about your origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. So, Brandon Smith here, really excited to have some time with you here today. I guess I'll start where I am now and kind of work my way backwards into the origin story.
Yeah.
So, I work in the organization development space currently. My background is more leadership development. So, I've worked in a lot of organizations responsible for developing leaders, done some executive coaching work. I have my master's degree in IO. I have a PhD in leadership and org development, and I teach in an IO master's program. So teaching talent acquisition, recruiting. So pretty excited about this space, excited for the potential of AI that it's going to bring to the space. And where I got really interested in working in IO psychology was straight out of high school. I joined the military. Like that was my
Okay.
experience. And this is circa around the time we were in Iraq. And I had some really great experiences with leaders and then also some not so great experiences. And that really got me interested in what are the things that make for great leaders? How can we train leaders? How can we develop them? And that's really been my life's work. So really excited to chat with you today a little bit on leadership.
Yeah, and it's interesting that IO, from my recollection, has its birth or inception or its kind of what's the word that I'm looking for? Its rise to prominence when it comes to the military. So being able to identify which individuals should be placed in what roles. Not many individuals know that about IO is that our we really came into prominence in the military. Is that the way you remember it too?
Yeah, it's a good call out. When you think
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
selection aspect of IO
Hmm.
psychology, a lot of that has its roots in thinking about who would make a good officer in the military. So you're spot on there.
Perfect. All right. So leadership, that's a pretty big topic. From your perspective, what exactly does that mean?
Oh my gosh, it's a great question, David.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
much time do we have on this
There you
podcast?
go.
Because I
Yeah,
think we
yeah.
could spend over an hour just talking about what is a leadership exactly. If I were to pull one of these books off the shelf, there are so many various definitions out there. And I think I remember a quote that was like, there's no topic that has been so deeply studied, but yet know so little about it still. But there are some common ways we can think about leadership. For me, I think about one, it's a process. So it's not just like an individual is a leader, but when we think about leadership, it is that process of influencing a group towards a shared goal. So that's a way that I think about it. Easy, think about influence, that's leadership.
Gotcha. And so there is kind of two big, what's the word that I'm looking for? Two big groups, two big philosophies, two big approaches. So from my experience, individuals typically fall in one or the other. So I'm going to ask you, are leaders born or can individuals learn to become leaders? What are your thoughts there?
So that's a great debate. Can I
Yeah,
say yes to both,
there you
actually? I
go.
think that one, leadership is something that is developable. People can learn to do it. I said it's a process. People can learn that process, how to be more effective at it. If that were not true, then I wouldn't have a job. Like, what
Yeah.
am I doing here? You're just born as a leader. And what we also know is there are some maybe traits that we have that might lend to being more effective as a leader. It is also true that those traits impact leader emergence. And when I say leader emergence, I know we're talking to some non-IOs out here,
Yep.
like who actually gets picked to be a leader. So, for example, if I'm very extroverted and I like to take charge, I might get selected as a leader, but that doesn't necessarily make me effective as a leader. So, I will say highly developable. I think there are some traits, or there are the research would suggest that certain traits lend themselves to being more effective, but maybe more importantly, they lend themselves to who is selected and who becomes a leader as well. And when you say born or made, when you think about like great man theories that we
Hmm.
used to look at, like, oh, if you're tall, if you're from a rich family or nobility, then you're born as a leader. We've kind of moved away from some of that. But if you start to look at personality and the relationship between personality and leadership, then you are talking about something that someone would be born with.
Gotcha. Okay. And so for me, what I default to is professional sports. And so for
Mm.
me, that is a great kind of microcosm of basically a lot of IO fundamental principles. And so from there, I look at the how individuals, how teams identify their leaders. And so they identify a couple of skills or a couple of characteristics. From your perspective, bringing it back to the work world, do you identify any characteristics, any skills, any potential competencies that most leaders or what we quote unquote identify as a successful leader may possess?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what gets tricky about this sometimes is we talk about leadership like very broadly, like, okay, you're a leader,
Yeah.
but
What
if
does that
you're
mean?
talking about a
Yeah.
leader of a football team versus a leader in the military versus I work in the tech industry or I work in a hospital, that's all going to look a little bit different depending on the context that you're in. And so something else we know about leadership is that it is highly contextual. Now, certainly there are certain things that would lend itself to being more effective. Again, situation dependent, but someone who's decisive, someone who makes good decisions, someone who is more empathetic. All of these are example of traits we might look for in an effective leader. But the other thing that I would call out beyond context, it's also dependent on what level of leadership you're at. So if
Mm,
I'm a first line supervisor, I'm very close to the work. Probably my technical competence is going to be very important as I'm directing people who are doing the work. But as you go up to a middle level manager versus a CEO of a large organization, at the higher levels, something like strategic thinking may become more important. So I think that was like a big non-answer to your
yeah, yeah.
question, with the answer being it depends.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. And so, circling back to a point you shared a little bit earlier in terms of can leaders be born or can they be made? I think where most organizations struggle is they find individuals who are fantastic individual contributors. They're highly proficient in the job that they're doing. And so, the automatic assumption is, well, if they're great at this individual contributor role, they'll just keep progressing and just slide right into, that first line supervisor and then keep growing that way. That's not always the case. And so what are your thoughts there?
David, I that is like a soapbox that I would
There you
love to
go.
get on with you because one, it's what very much gets done in organizations. So I'll go back in my history. Once upon a time, I did technical project management and I worked with a lot of engineers. And so somebody who was a fabulous engineer, they would say, "Oh, this person's a great engineer. Let's make
Yeah.
them a leader of engineers."
Mhm.
And what you very quickly discover, it's a much different set of competencies that are required to lead people, lead engineers, than it is to actually do the engineering work. What we know to be true is that past performance is typically the best predictor of future performance, but that's in a similar role.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily predictive of someone in a different role. And to your point, the role of being a leader requires much different skills, competencies than the role of being an individual contributor. And that's why, unfortunately, we select people sometimes that are really great individual contributors and they fail or they're not successful as a leader. One of the
Yeah.
other challenges associated with that is when you think about career progression, it is the case that for a lot of people, in order to advance in their career, they have to go into a leadership role. So it might even be like, I'm not necessarily interested in the work of leadership, but I want to get promoted, so I'm going to go do it anyway. So having some career pathing for the more technical positions, I think is a good path to take to help solve for that a little bit.
Gotcha. And so, from an employee perspective, even potentially from an organizational perspective, we should think more broadly in terms of how individuals promote within the company. Leadership should not be the default. Maybe individuals don't want to. They're comfortable, being the technical expert, being, the magician or being the artist, if you will, in terms of I'm going to be excellent at doing this rather than I want to continue growing, continue progressing. So there's only one option for me. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it. And probably much easier said than done to your point about, okay, we're going to make this person a technical expert. We're going to put them in a SME position. But how long can you continue to do that? I've also seen, though, that especially in the tech industry,
Yeah.
if someone's really good, they can be financially compensated for that. And certainly, when we talk about achievement, there's a financial component of that, but sometimes it's where someone sits in a hierarchy of an organization. But it really depends on what people are fascinated or interested in doing for a career. And so some of the coaching work that I've done, especially as people are thinking about their career, it's really helping them see what are the things that you're interested in, like what motivates you, what
Hmm.
what do you value? What's the type of work? Oh, I like to solve really tough problems and I like to work by myself and I'm happy if I have the screen up and I'm coding for 8 hours. Okay, well, if that's the work that you like to do,
Yeah.
then that might not lend itself as well towards being a leader of people. And helping
Yep.
people see that, kind of like holding up a mirror for them, I think is what is helpful.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely. And so to your point, I think there are a couple of things that are happening right now simultaneously. So in the tech world, they typically value both, in terms of building a product, but also in terms of compensation, individuals who have this very specific set of skills and expertise within a particular domain. We're seeing that a lot right now with AI. I've come across articles where, Meta or other companies are spending millions of dollars, maybe even more than that, on individuals who really have this specified and specific skill set. So those individuals, they're good to go. One of the things or interesting aspects I'm also seeing is, on the one hand, organizations are really highly compensating those specialized individual contributors. And on the other hand, they're also eliminating, like I just saw Salesforce eliminated a whole chunk or a whole line of supervisors and managers. So, with all of this happening, does leadership still have a role in the world of AI? And I know that's a
Yeah, it's
big
a
question.
great question, David. And so
Yeah,
I think that's what we're here to talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
some
yeah,
today. And the reality is, no one, if I had my crystal ball and said, let's look into the future 5 to 10 years, what is this going to look like? The reality is nobody really knows. So there's a lot of speculation going on about what will this look like. I think the prevailing sentiment that a lot of people have is we're nervous about whose job's going away. We're
yeah.
seeing it is the case that a lot of entry level jobs, those might be easy targets to replace with AI. But some of these more senior roles or maybe even leadership roles, can they be replaced by AI? But I'll flip it back to you. Imagine this, David.
Yeah.
Imagine we're Monday morning, we show up to a staff meeting, and instead of a manager standing there talking to
Yeah.
us about the week, it's some type of bot. And maybe it's not a physical bot, but you know how you can carry on a chat conversation with like Chat GPT. We could flash it up on the screen. Chat GPT can tell us about like, hey, Brandon, here's what you're working on. David, here's what you're working on. I'm kind of curious to hear from you. How do you think that would land with
Yeah.
a group if we moved in that direction?
Yeah, to your point, I don't think we would land well. I think it'd be confusing, frustrating, potentially upsetting. But now I'm going to raise the stakes a little bit. So here's
Okay.
where things get a little interesting. And so, yeah, to your point, if an employee were to know the individual who is my quote unquote supervisor is, an AI, a bot, of course it would lead to those emotions. I think where things get a little bit tricky is if we don't know. And so what I
Mm.
mean by that is, if the person I'm seeing on the other side of the screen, if I don't know if that's a real person or not, does that change my perception of their leadership? And so I don't know the answer to that. But I think AI is getting to a point. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So I like how we're ping-ponging back and forth now. So for me, and then feel free to push back if at any time, it doesn't make any
Sure.
sense. And I'm going to talk big picture and then I'm going to bring it down to reality. So for me, I sometimes I ask myself, within an organization, what is the purpose of a leader or a manager? Like the primary purpose. And I think it's to translate and help realize the CEO's vision of what an
Hmm.
organization should do. So of course, it's almost impossible for one person to do that and disseminate clearly that message across all employees. But what if AI can create an exact avatar, an exact replica of the CEO, and can distribute it out to all employees? Not only that, but the AI will also interact with each employee on an individualized basis, but in a way that best resonates with them. So I don't know what to do with that. And I think that's going to come sooner rather than later. And I don't know what that world's going to look like. But I'm curious to hear, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept. So one something I've seen recently that I think sheds a little bit of light on this. So it was I may have read it in HBR, and I apologize that I can't cite the source, but in the study they looked at crafting a message and then using AI to make it more empathetic, for example. And when people received that message, they rated this as like, wow, this is more empathetic than these messages who were just crafted by humans. However, once people found out that it was crafted by AI, they felt like this message is horrible, it's tone deaf, it missed the mark.
Yeah.
So something I'm curious about is that going to like shift over time? Like we're the first generation who didn't have this Gen AI and then now has it. So I think there's some skepticism there. But as the new generations enter the workforce and they've always known it, maybe they're going to have a different perspective of, I don't care that you crafted that with Gen AI. It just feels better to me. It's more empathetic.
Yep.
And I think where some of that can fall flat a little bit is like in our real time interactions, right? So I might use ChatGPT to make a message more empathetic. But David, if you come to me and you tell me, hey, I lost a loved one in my family, right? I can't say, like, wait a minute, time out. Let me go to ChatGPT, figure
Yeah.
out how I need to respond in an empathetic way. And maybe in the future, Elon will have us with the Neuralinks and we'll be able to
Yeah.
just like tap into it. But in that moment, it's showing empathy of like, David, my gosh, that's horrible. I'm so sorry. I'm here for you. What can I do? Do you need a couple of days? Maybe not even asking you, like, hey, take a couple of days, David. Your workload, don't worry about that. I got you. Do what you need to do. So that empathy in action is very much human. And what I would suspect, even with an avatar, in a similar way to when we know a message is crafted by ChatGPT, it just doesn't have the way to connect with you and really like have that shared human experience. Like with you and me,
Yeah.
I know what it is to suffer loss. I've experienced that before. Whereas some type of bot avatar is not going to experience that. I'll say one last thing and then I'll let
Yep.
you jump in. When you talk about like task assignment, I think that is a good use of AI. Like, okay, we're tracking tasks, we're monitoring workflows, maybe we're summarizing a meeting and sending out action items. But those things that are like, what is the purpose of a leader? Establish a vision, right? And really get people excited about it. I don't think that's going to come as much from an avatar as it will from a person because we know there's like that emotional component of leadership also that I think is uniquely human.
Gotcha. And so I definitely want to expand on that, but I want to pause and then I want to get your final thoughts on this. As you were sharing your example in terms of individuals being upset if they know a message is coming from AI, but that's the current generation that we live in now. So an
Yep.
analogy I'll use is when it comes to consumer products. So for me, there was a point in time where person made or man made, let's say cars, chairs, furniture, that was really highly valued. And people really appreciated the fact that someone took the time to create this by hand. Conversely, that or at the same time, that drove up prices of those goods. And so on the one
Hmm.
hand, we really value that a person created this, but on the other end, people are always looking for top quality, predictable quality, and the lowest price, which often is kind of mass production, mass creation. And so I'm wondering, let's take cars, for example, where of course, at the very high end, individuals still appreciate handmade, custom-built cars. But for most of us, we want, something that's reliable, something that's consistent, something that we can buy at a pretty reasonable price. So with consumers being more and more comfortable with automation, create a lot of the things that we're consuming, will that also trickle over into the workplace? Where right now, because we're in the middle of this transition period, we're kind of uneasy or uncomfortable knowing it's an AI. But as we get more and more comfortable, will we then start to appreciate or expect it? Because maybe, and I don't know if this is the case, meetings that we go to, emails that are sent out, maybe that goes away. And instead, it's just an avatar or an AI, and we start to appreciate that. So I know I threw a lot at you and I see the connection and I know, maybe I'm talking out of my behind here, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a good point that I don't fully know the answer to. And I think there
Okay.
is a tension there between what we appreciate more versus what's like more scalable and affordable, right? So if I were to go out and I need a desk for my office,
Yeah.
I can go get this handmade
Hmm.
desk from someone who went and chopped down the tree themselves. They've been
Yeah.
working for 30, 40 years in this business. I'm like, wow. And I can tell everyone who comes in like this amazing story about my desk, but it is so expensive. Or I
Yeah.
can go to IKEA, grab something that still does the work. So Yeah, you're right. I think being able to make something scalable, make something affordable. Something I have read recently and come across is this is true as it relates to like artwork and music. So if something is generated by AI and it's art, and once people know that, they don't assign as much value to it. They assign value to the art that someone created. And I know David created this. I know David's background. I can imagine him like taking the brush to paper. Same thing with music. And the last example I give, I think there was an example of like you could go online and watch world-class chess masters playing chess,
Yeah.
or you could watch a computer playing chess. The computer is better than the best chess masters in the world,
Yeah.
but people don't necessarily have interest in doing that. They have interest in seeing people do it. So, to your point about the workplace, I think there will be things that can be outsourced, the things we're talking about around like workflows, meeting minutes, task assignments. What I think that frees up, though, is for us to get back to those things that are fundamentally human about leadership, like the empathy, the like getting people really excited about a vision. And if you think about a role as a leader, in most cases, we spend a lot of time, and if we, I know not everybody makes this distinction between like leadership and management, right?
Hmm.
But if we think about leadership as really like setting the vision and direction, and management more of making sure that vision is actually achieved through the organization of tasks, well, that management can potentially be outsourced to AI or augmented or assisted. And then on the leadership side, I could spend more focus there. Here's the reality in a lot of managers' day to day work, they're so caught up in the management aspect of things that they're not able to take a step back and do the leadership part of the function. So, what it's actually, in my mind, going to allow us to do is the pendulum to swing a little bit where it needs to where we're able to focus on even like having a one-on-one and sitting down and saying like, hey David, what are you interested in, like how can we think about your development? A lot of times those conversations don't occur, not because the leaders and managers don't have good intent, it's that they're just so task saturated with these other things.
Gotcha. And that segues perfectly into kind of the next section I wanted to talk about. So you did share leaders, it kind of their expectation of their job falls into two big buckets. There's kind of the task approach and the management or relationship approach. At the same time, you also differentiated or noted there's a difference between managers versus leaders. So we have
Mm,
task versus relationship, manager versus leader, and then here we have AI. And so
yep.
how, of all those variables that are in play, what do you see happening? What do you see potentially the future looking like with all that going on?
Yeah, and I think it's exactly what we're kind of teasing at
Hmm.
already. When we think about like leadership and management or task and relationship behaviors, what we know is that it's not as simple as like you're a manager or you're a leader. Very oftentimes, those roles exist together simultaneously. And what I have experienced in some of my leadership development work is that sometimes people have more of an aptitude towards one or the other. Like some people are really great at like this leadership aspect. They're very charismatic. They're very passionate. They're really able to get people excited around the vision that they're establishing. Within that, there's also the importance of establishing a vision that is like meaningful and will be successful, right? Like, what is that next product that people need, and how are we going to provide that to them? And then there are people who are better at that management aspect of I'm really good at like organizing tasks, making sure like I'm sending out meeting minutes and keeping
Yeah.
the work organized and structured. Some people are really great at both of those things. What I think it could do is level the playing field a little bit. Those people who are really good at like inspiring the vision, helping keep people's passion around the work very high, they might be able to use AI to assist in some of those things we're talking about of like, okay, we've had this meeting now. I don't have to sit around and like generate meeting minutes and assign people actions. I'm able to do that via AI. It goes into a system that tracks that. Maybe it sends like notifications to people as well. So I think that would be a good use of it. And that's really where I'm excited to see the technology go. And I think currently, so I'm not like the big AI technology
Yeah.
guru. When we talk about leadership as it relates to AI, we could talk about leadership helping an organization like adopt AI. Like, hey, as a
Mm.
leader, how do you take care of the change management? How do you think about the tasks that AI can do for you? That's not so much what we're talking about today. It's more that where can I get back to the fundamental things that as a leader I can be doing now that I'm having AI augment, assist certain tasks?
Yep, I like that. And so almost like I don't know if this is the right word, but this is the first one that popped into my head. Almost like the drudgery of leadership, like the
Hmm.
scheduling, the coordination, the note taking. It sounds like all of that can be, handled pretty successfully by AI. So that way leaders then have the opportunity to really be fully present, fully engaged in identifying. So let's say, Brandon, what are you interested? How do you see yourself developing? What would you like to develop in? So really focusing in on that relationship, which I think can be really beneficial to increasing the engagement of an employee, which ultimately theoretically should lead to higher productivity, ultimately benefiting the bottom line of an organization. So if an organization is contemplating, should we incorporate AI? I think to your point with that change management, kind of that reluctance, maybe the drudgery, if you will, would be a good first opportunity to see, can we offload all of this to AI?
I think that's a great point, David. And what if we envision a future where instead of AI taking jobs, it takes tasks that we're not as excited about and allows us to focus on work that we find more meaningful? And that to me could be the future state. Like if you think about your workforce, how do we motivate and engage people?
Yeah.
It's not, well, here I have this AI assist tool and now I can lay off 10% of my workforce. It's let me put this tool in. It allows people to be more productive. And what are other things that they can start to do on top of this? And I don't think that concept is too far fetched because I'm familiar, and I can't cite the exact organizations, but some organizations have implemented like a 20% time where it's a certain amount of time where their employees are able to work on the things that they're passionate about. It's not part of their day-to-day work. And in some ways, it's like the idea of job crafting. Job crafting being that, yes, I have this core job, but I find these little bits and pieces that I'm passionate about. So now we have this 20% time. It's not that those people aren't being productive for that 20%, but it's, hey, they have 20% free time because we've
Mhm.
replaced some of the tasks that they do with AI. So that is the future I would envision, and I would encourage leaders of organizations instead of having that eye towards like, how can I use this to cut people? How can I use this to enable people and allow them to be innovative, allow them to do meaningful work?
Yeah, and to your point, I think it was Google that had that I guess I don't want to say law, but that policy, if you will, that procedure. And if memory serves me right, I want to say Gmail came out of that, where an employee
Mm.
recognized we can do email a little bit differently, but they did it on their 20% time. Then they brought it back to Google and they said, actually, we can do it a little different and potentially do it a little bit better. And so, yeah, to your point, if individuals have more of an abundance mindset where they're not kind of dragged down by the drudgery, their curiosity starts to peak, their, contemplation starts to peak, and it's like all kind of ideas start to bubble up and lead to really big innovations. So I agree that AI can and probably will enable that, or for the organizations that choose to embrace that.
Love it. And if we're really like
Yeah.
ideating around what work could be in the future, here's the hot take for you. Why can't we have a 4-day work week
Ooh,
now as a
I love
result
it.
of AI,
Yeah.
right? So instead of like I'm going to cut people, I'm going to allow my staff to only work 4 days. That they're that much more productive because they're AI assisted and enabled. They're able to take care of the stuff they need to take care of on their 3-day weekend. They come back rested, relaxed. Their morale's higher. They're more engaged, more satisfied. Like that could be an approach that we could take as a result of AI. So how can we use AI as an opportunity to re-envision our relationship with work versus just a way to let's just be more productive, let's make more money with it?
Yeah, 100%. And so I am also hopeful for that future. But, both you and I see that as almost an eventuality where we're going to become so efficient, so productive, where we're going to have an opportunity to work 4 days a week. So you and I see that. Big business, there's actually a big push right now for return to office.
Hmm.
So I think a nice compromise where we see the 4-day work week, they want us to come back into the office. What if we come back into the office 4 days a week, where we have that really concentrated, effort, so that way we can optimize theoretically the benefits of return to office. But because we're so productive, we don't have to do Monday through Friday. And so, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I like that idea. The RTO is an interesting topic,
Yeah.
and I think I could probably, if you gave me 15 minutes, I could pull up articles and research that suggests like people need to be in person, they need to work in the office. I can pull up articles that suggest
Yeah.
like a lot of that ends up being idle time, people aren't able to focus. Fundamentally, one, I will say not everybody also has a luxury to work from home. It's a lot of knowledge work, depending on if you're more in the blue collar, more in the trades, you don't have that ability to do that type of work. So I also want to acknowledge that as well. What I've kind of seen, the trend I see around RTO is that if you're a sizable company with a good reputation and people want to work for you, the RTO works. Let's say I'm Apple, Microsoft, Google. Those companies, I want to go work for them. I want that on my resume. I'll move to San Francisco and I'll go work for that company. However, if you look at this company that maybe they only have like 100 people, they don't even want a storefront, for example, like they don't want the real estate costs, and they're able to attract a larger talent pool, not just across the US, but somebody who might not want to go into the office or be willing to rotate. So in some way, or relocate rather, in some ways that can be their competitive advantage. To your point, could it be the case that people return to the office, but they're doing fewer days because they're more AI assisted? I think that could be a possibility. Another possibility could be because we have AI, we're able to collaborate so much more effectively. I think about us even like being in this Zoom room together. Like, what other virtual tools might be enabled through tech that allow us to work very productively? And I've seen, I don't know if you've ever been to any of these virtual conferences that you have like avatars and you're able to move around like a virtual space and you can come together in meetings or go to a particular room. I'm thinking about that as a technology that might enable more working from home versus having to go into an office.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I have gone to a virtual recruiting event where it was still a little clunky. It was during the pandemic where, a whole bunch of organizations set up their recruiting booths and you could click around and walk your avatar to each one and then the video would pop up of a recruiter from that organization. And so yeah, it was awkward. But I think
Mm,
with the advances in technology, it's going to become much more seamless in terms of the experience where it's not almost like playing Super Nintendo. It's going to be okay, it's now PS5 level graphics or PS6 level graphics and I
right.
think yeah, eventually we'll get there.
Well, I think it's also what people are used to, right? I think that's like a big like transition. It's like, okay, I'm used to working every day in the office. It's odd for me to be on these Zoom rooms and be at
Yeah.
home by myself. Versus if you have a new generation and are in the workforce and that's all they know, if all they know are like these virtual spaces,
Yeah.
if all they know is a Zoom meeting, if all they know is AI assisted enabled work, then I think they're going to react to it a little bit differently. And that's what we can't know. But I think some of this, oh, David, you used ChatGPT to come up with that script
Yeah.
or something like that. That right now, I think there's a lot of judgment associated with
Hmm.
that. Maybe in much the same way when, let's say, like Google first came out, like, oh, David, you just Googled
Yeah.
that. Like, you don't really know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. Whereas now, yeah, of course I Googled it. Why wouldn't I Google it?
Yeah.
That's where I'm going to get my information from. So I think there could be a shift there. But I'm kind of curious, like, when you're thinking about RTO versus working from
Hmm.
home, how are you thinking about it? I know you chat with a lot of folks through the podcast.
Yeah. So for me, yeah, they both have their pros and cons. I think so. I lean more towards remote work, more towards, being comfortable in a virtual environment. Like you shared, that's where we have the most top talent. They're more interested in having higher levels of autonomy, higher levels of they can decide what works for me, what doesn't work for me, what time works for me, what location works for me. So if an organization really wants to attract top talent and fully harness their capability, I almost feel they have to use remote work because
Mm.
otherwise that talent's just going to go to an organization that does allow that. On the flip side, to your point, organizations that have this really strong reputation, I'm thinking of most of Elon Musk's companies, whether it's SpaceX, Tesla, Twitter, or X. He basically mandated everybody come back to work. And so there are pros and cons. But I tend to lean more towards the remote work. Also, to your point, I think there's age differences or generational differences. So I'm a millennial. I grew up gaming, and
Mm.
I came about when AIM started to be a thing, AOL Online, instant messaging, even before text messaging, which is kind of awkward. But yeah, so I grew up with AIM. I grew up online gaming. So I remember playing, I forget what the first person shooter was, but playing with others in real time, doing the same task in a virtual environment. That's kind of what we're doing today. And so I grew up comfortable communicating virtually and, not really knowing the other person on the other line, even though we would game Monday through Friday. And I think today's generation, with basically they live on social media. Everything they do that is of consequence is on social media. And so it's almost like, what's the point of being in person? Everything I do, everything that matters is all in a virtual world. Why isn't work also part of this virtual world? So, with all of that said, that's where I lean. But I know I'm a little bit more progressive, a little bit more forward thinking. So, I don't know if that's in reality, if you will.
Well, and so speaking of
Yeah.
reality, the reality is there is no one right answer to
Yeah.
that. I think it's up to the individual businesses to decide what their strategy is. Like if you're
Yeah.
a business and your strategy is like, I want people in person for collaboration purposes, as long as you're able to find people to fill those roles, there isn't high turnover, then that aligns with your strategy. If your strategy, like your talent strategy is more like, hey, I'm a smaller business, maybe I don't or can't pay people as
Yeah.
much, but I'm going to make up for it with this perk of allowing people to work from home. I don't have to have the physical office space. Then that aligns with your strategy. And I think more power to you. One thing I will call out, I'm pretty sure that I have seen in the literature where the RTO disproportionately affects women, right? So if you think about like your traditional gender roles
Hmm.
where potentially a woman is more responsible for like childcare, then she might not be able to return to the office as easily. And it's not that she's like working from home caring for a child, but let's say she's more able to drop the kids off at daycare or kind of get the kids to school and doesn't have the long commute. Or maybe someone's fortunate enough to have like childcare in their own home. I can work all day and over my lunch break, I can see my child. So I think being aware of some of those potential social impacts
Yeah.
to those RTO policies. But again, recognizing, I think what's fascinating here is there are those roles that, yeah, new moms, if you're working in the hospital, if you're working in the service industry, those individuals have to go back to work also. So I think there's probably some equity aspects to it as well.
Yeah, and as you were sharing that, not only are women predominantly impacted by RTO, but I also think individuals who, what's the word that I'm looking for, are neurodivergent. So what I mean by
Hmm.
that is individuals, they process information and share information or feedback differently. And I can't remember if this was a conversation or an article I read. Neither here nor there, but individuals who may be a little bit more introverted may not be as comfortable in a real world environment. Let's say it's in a meeting room being that contrarian or sharing a
Hmm.
different point of view. Whereas in a virtual meeting, the social, what's the word that I'm looking for, environment is not as robust. So it's almost like speaking into a phone or speaking into, a screen. Individuals who may be more introverted are more likely to voice their alternative perspective, their contrarian view. Whereas in a real world environment, maybe that's not always the case. So I'm not saying it's a positive, but that's, I think, potentially another thing to consider.
I think it's great. I'm not as familiar with that research,
Okay.
but it's a good call out. And to tie things back to I have seen some research where your Gen AIs are allowing people who maybe are a little more neurodivergent. So, for example, I think I was looking at a study with ADHD, and if people were asked to brainstorm, sometimes maybe the way they organize their thoughts makes it a little bit more difficult to come up with like a looking at a blank sheet of paper and come up with all of these different ideas. What if you're able to take AI as like a thought partner in your
Mm,
brainstorming? And I certainly think anybody who's used it before, you recognize that not all of the ideas are good ideas, or maybe it's
yeah.
just not aligned with how you're thinking about it. But having that as a starting point of like, okay, I'm trying to solve this problem, take on this role. How would you approach it? Give me like 10 ideas, and that you're able to look through them. But ultimately, you're the arbiter of the idea that needs to be implemented. And fundamentally, what we have to remember is we own those decisions. So we
Yeah.
can't outsource decisions to artificial intelligence. I think people still have to own them, especially when we're thinking about ethical decision making. Like if it's high stakes impacting people, thinking about like ethics, justice, fundamentally we have to own those decisions. And I think that's an example of things we wouldn't want to outsource to AI. Like we don't want Skynet out here
Yeah.
deciding the
Yeah.
fate of
Yeah.
humanity. We really need to keep that for ourselves.
Yeah. Shout out to my Terminator fans. So for those who
Yes.
don't know, yeah. Awesome. So yeah, I think to your point, ethics is definitely key consideration. I think morals is going to be a key consideration. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So I think a lot of the cognitive load, a lot of the really technical skills, that's going to be offloaded into AI. So I think where the human in the loop comes in is we have to determine, is this an ethical, is this a moral, is this something we should be doing? So fundamentally, I think as we progress towards the future, we're going to stop asking ourselves, can we do this? And I think more often
Mm.
than not, we're going to start asking ourselves, should we do this? And I think so, zooming out, really, really big picture, I think the quote unquote non-technical or non-business skills today are going to be the most critical moving forward. So ethics, reasoning, logic, morals, those are kind of ambiguous, but huge in philosophy. I think that's going to be the fundamental skill set needed to be successful in business moving forward because all the technical analytics, all the research that can be offloaded. And ultimately, I think it's going to come down to, okay, we have this, we can do it, but should we? What are your thoughts there?
I think that's great. Not can we, but should we? I think
Yeah,
with technology, sometimes it's very much a can we do it? Can we produce this thing? Even when you think about Gen AI, for example, especially when it was first becoming popularized, people were like, should we even be doing this? Is this
yeah,
going to like take over the
yeah.
world? Is it going to end all the jobs? And the reality is that I feel like with technology, people push the envelope. It's we're going to do this thing that technology allows us to do, but this like can we versus should we? So let's take it back to a very real example that
Yeah.
we were just talking about. Technology will allow me to lay off 10% of my workforce. Should I lay off 10% of my workforce? What is really the purpose of my organization? Is it only to look after the bottom line and make money, or is it to like improve the livelihood of society, community? And when we talk about corporate social
Yeah.
responsibility, what is our responsibility beyond just making money? So I think that's a very real use case of could we versus should we. To your point about ethics, ethical
Hmm.
decision, morals,
Hmm.
justice. I think we
Yeah.
have to hold on to those things and with a
Yeah.
very tight grip. We cannot
Yeah.
let go of those things. And I also do wonder, and I'm curious of your experience here. It's very easy when I'm typing up an email and I have it in Outlook to use like my Grammarly or whatever AI agent I want to just revise my email. I can even click like make this friendlier, make it more empathetic.
Yeah.
And it loses my voice once I do that. It doesn't sound like me anymore. It sounds like this, whatever tool that I'm using. And as everybody starts doing that, it's almost as if we don't even have our own voice anymore. So how do we retain our voice, our personality? And I've also seen like these interesting posts of like, how can I make this sound more like me instead of
Yeah.
it being generated by Gen AI? So basically, we're like
Yeah.
taking things, producing it, wanting it to make it sound more like our voice. So when we put it through a Gen AI checker that it does not recognize, like we're trying to trick Gen AI with Gen AI, it's just like a strange place to be in these days. So I think having some originality, having some like personality, having some
Hmm.
quirks about yourself,
Yeah.
and then also the last piece that I've been sitting with a little bit is like we have to make sure we don't lose our curiosity
Yeah.
because you and I are sitting here, we're engaging in like a very rich conversation that I'm enjoying quite a bit.
Yeah.
And we're like playing around with ideas, and
Yeah.
maybe we don't have the exact answers. And I have a perspective, and you have a perspective, and we're very curious about the topic. In the future, it might just be like, okay, I'm gonna hop on, my latest Gen AI and just discover, hey, Gen AI, how's AI gonna affect leadership? And I'm just
Yeah.
gonna get the answer instead of having a conversation. And I'm sure you've seen this. You can create your own podcast, like give it a resource and say, hey, produce a podcast for me. But I think there's something lost there in that originality of like what it means to be human.
Yeah. 100%. And I think this is another skill set or another approach that we can include or lump together with kind of ethics, morals, justice, I think is authenticity.
Mm,
So circling back to earlier in our conversation, you mentioned today we can't have the best virtual chess player play against the other virtual chess player. I want to say it's Alpha. Who somebody created it, where it is
yeah.
literally. So I was actually talking to my wife about this last week or a couple weeks ago. I don't remember exactly, but I was curious to think or to start thinking about, well, what jobs, what professions will be immune from AI takeover. And I think professional sports or anything to do with people's performance. Because right
Hmm.
now we can have well, theoretically, we can have AI, we can have robots play, let's say, football against each other. Why hasn't somebody created that league yet? Or we can do baseball, we could do boxing, we can do chess, we can do almost anything. So why hasn't anybody created that yet? And to me, it's as people, we're not interested in that. We want to see what the highest human potential is, not the highest potential period. And so for me, authenticity, originality. I think we appreciate and recognize that in others, and we want to see that in others. And I think that might be, although it's just a sliver, AI, it'll be hard for AI to take that over. So I know that was a lot of different ideas coming together, but yeah, what are your thoughts there?
I think you're onto something there, David.
Okay.
And let me ask you this in
Yep.
response to that. Who is your favorite athlete? Regardless of the sport, like
Man,
who is the athlete that you're like, this is the person for me?
that's a good question. So overall, so I'm a big fight fan. So
Okay.
I've, grew up watching boxing. I'm a huge UFC fan. So for me, that is probably one of the most grueling sports when it comes to physicality, both in terms of
Hmm.
actual fighting, but in terms of just cardiovascular endurance, strength, power. So I'm leaning towards, I'm not sure if you're familiar, George St. Pierre. He
Oh yeah.
is, yeah. So for me, he's probably one of my favorite, one of the most well-rounded in terms of just strength, endurance, focus, concentration, footwork. I think overall, he's one of the best athletes I've ever seen. But what are your
Okay, so
thoughts? Yeah,
George St. Pierre,
yeah,
GSP, as I've heard
yeah,
him
yeah,
called.
yeah,
Like when you think about him as your favorite athlete, or if the listeners are thinking about this, maybe they have a favorite sport, or maybe they have a favorite actor. Pick whatever that is. I would imagine a lot of times what you appreciate about that person is like knowing their story. Like, what is it about
yeah.
GSP? Like, well, he lost this fight over
Hmm.
here, to Matt Hughes or
Yeah,
Matt Sarah, whoever he lost to.
yeah,
I can't remember. And then he's like on this path to redemption. And if you hear his story before the fight, he had a tough childhood and he used to get bullied. Like, we're able to relate to that. Like, that is something that we connect with as people. So to your point about, yeah, we can throw some robots in the ring and let
yeah,
them bash it out, but
yeah,
okay, Bob the robot, he doesn't really have an origin story, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
can't connect with this person. So I think for that reason, that's why we are able to, like, that's why that won't go away. And very similarly, I think it applies to like leadership. Like we all have
hmm
our quirks, but hey, David, yeah, sometimes he gets on my nerves, but he really has like good
yeah,
intent. We're
yeah,
able to like chat about sports. I know he has my best interests at heart, and that really motivates me and inspires me in a way like an avatar might not. It is interesting though. So you kind of started that line of thought of what is going to go away.
yeah,
It's a great question, but I've even seen where, for example, executive coaching. We can
mm,
have an avatar sit down, have a coaching conversation with you. They can probably listen better. They can pick up on like subtle cues potentially. They can look at like facial movements and really like do some deep, I'll say understanding. I don't think that it's truly like an understanding.
yeah,
And I don't know how people are going to respond and react to that because there's something around like the accountability of a conversation with a person. I tell you I'm going to do something, David, as you're my coach, and I get on the call next week, and then we have a conversation about it. I'm like, David's going to ask about this. If it's some type of bot or an avatar, I'm gonna be like, whatever, avatar. Like, you don't know what it
yeah,
is to
yeah,
go work a full-time job and have a family. No, I didn't do it. Forget about that. And I think that's even true of I'm very impressed by ChatGPT and the ability to like have a conversation.
yeah,
And sometimes I'll do it when I'm trying to learn something, but I also find it very unfulfilling. It's not like I'm bored this evening. Let me spend an hour talking with ChatGPT. No, I'm going to call one of my buddies and ask them about their life and what they've been up to. So I think it's still missing the mark in a lot of ways for people interactions, in my opinion. I don't know. Have you ever used like the voice feature on ChatGPT by any chance?
Not yet. So I don't want to fall down the rabbit hole of her, where eventually, I start having more and more intimate conversations, and then,
Right.
I fall in love. It's like, no, I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole. So no, I haven't. But
Okay, fair.
yeah, have you by any chance?
I do it more if I'm like
Okay,
trying to learn something, and especially if I
gotcha.
can't be in front of my computer. Let's say I won't say driving. I think that's a bad example.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
driving, focus in on the road. But
yeah.
maybe I'm like walking around the neighborhood. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm really interested in like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's been a while since I've looked at it. Like, give me a quick rundown of it, and it'll give you a rundown. I'm like, okay, I think I heard you say this about this particular element. Do I have that right? Can you give me a little bit more detail? Maybe give me an analogy here, and you can really carry on a conversation with it. And again, I feel like it's more like a chore than actually
Mm.
like something. If I were having a conversation with you, David, and you were teaching me about it, I think that would be much more engaging, impactful. And then the other thing is with those those technologies, I can just kind of shut it off when I'm ready. Let's say if I were in a coaching session, like, all right, we've been doing this for 10 minutes. I'm done here. I want to go watch the football game. Whereas
Yeah.
if I'm with my real coach, I'm not going to do that. There's like some social pressure associated with a real interaction.
Yeah. And so to your point, as you're bringing up GSP, why we want to see him and going back to executive coaching too, why that may be difficult to replace with AI. As you were sharing that, I was thinking, well, why is that the case? What is it? And I was thinking, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. It's our ability as individuals to see ourselves in the other person, to see they have accomplished this. I have the potential to also accomplish this. I don't think we have that same feedback or that same perspective if it's a robot, if it's an AI, if it's a machine. Because to your point, if going back to the UFC, let's say we had Mercedes-Benz fighting against BMW, does it really matter? Not really, because me as a person, I cannot see myself being a Mercedes or being a whatever, machine company there is. But if it's a GSP or if it's an executive coach, I can see myself in what they're sharing, what they're doing, or the feedback they're giving me. Is that resonating?
I think so. I think
Okay.
what is it to be on this journey we call being a
Yeah,
human,
yeah,
right? It's challenging. There's moments of great sorrow, disappointment. There's also moments of being very excited, being happy, a child being born, a new relationship. Like there's so many ups and
yeah,
downs, and a lot of our journeys are unique, but we can also relate to those things. Like, okay, David, maybe I haven't lost a loved one recently, but I know what it's like to lose someone, and I can relate to you in that reason. Like to be fundamentally human and understand that experience, that understanding piece is something AI is not going to have, even if it mimics what it is to be a human. Like, hey, act as a human who's done all of these things and had these experiences. You were in the military and you went to war.
yeah,
That they might say the right things, but behind it all, I'm going to know what they don't really know what that experience is like. They don't know what it's like to like step into the desert and the dust flies up around your feet and the smells and the sounds and what it is to be afraid and nervous. I want to talk to somebody who knows what those experiences are like. Even if it's not the exact same experience, you know what it's like to be afraid of something, and we can kind of talk through that together. So that's how I'm thinking about it. And I have seen people on LinkedIn like, oh, I'm dealing with this challenge, and I popped into Chat GPT, and it really gave me like some good perspective and clarity.
yeah.
I think that's great for some people as well. Likely it's going to be like an individual experience, like many things.
Yeah. And so to your point, I think ultimately it comes to it's going to be difficult to copy and paste either empathy or emotional intelligence. It might mimic
Hmm.
it, it might look like it, but it's almost the copy isn't as good as the original. So it's almost, if we're thinking about art, yeah, someone can have a copy of the Mona Lisa, but is it as good as the actual Mona Lisa? I don't know if it is.
Well, to that point, you can
Yeah.
go to I can go to Walmart probably and find a
There
copy
you
of a
go.
very
Yeah.
famous painting for like $2. $10, whatever the case may be. I
Yeah.
don't buy art, so I'm
Yeah.
ignorant
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But that original artwork is going to go for millions. So it's exactly that point that you're making is there's something around that original, the story, the history of it that isn't the same for the copy of it. And I think fundamentally we appreciate people's imperfections, right? If you even think about like your athletes, for example, like, yeah, this athlete, I really appreciate this athlete, but they lost this fight or they made this mistake, or maybe this person went to jail and they did something and they were truly remorseful for it, and they've really like turned their lives around. We can appreciate that struggle, that
Yeah.
imperfection, and I think that's going to be lost with any type of AI. And I think again, going back to like being a leader, I
Yeah.
think we a big part of like leadership and pushing people is to be able to show vulnerability myself. So if I were to go to you and like, David, here's the thing. I'm such a horrible procrastinator. It is something I have
Yeah.
worked on for years. I want you as my partner. Keep me accountable on that. Like, don't let me wait till the last minute. And that's going to open up you, David, to feel like, wow, I can show up and talk about the things that I'm struggling with Brandon because he opened up with me about it. That is like a very real phenomenon that exists. So I think having that vulnerability, the mistakes, the imperfections, we actually would we do away with that as humans if we could?
Yeah.
I don't know. Would we?
That's a great question. But I think I like the idea of those imperfections. And I think what we're ultimately attracted to is that comeback story or that
Hmm.
redemption story. Whereas AI, potentially, they're always going to get it right,
Yeah.
theoretically. But the probability or the likelihood of them doing kind of a really big mess up I want to say is not as likely as a person. But going back to how do we see ourselves in this other person is okay, this person went through a big, mountain they had to climb or a big hurdle, a big drawback, a big, flaw, issue, whatever the case may be. But this is their arc and this is their redemption story. And I think that's going to be
Hmm.
difficult, if not impossible, for us as people to see that in AI and then to relate to it. I don't know if the future will be different, but as of right now, I can't see. So ChatGPT makes a mistake, doesn't really matter. But to your point, Brandon, if I saw this arc, then this redemption story, that really resonates and it has a deeper connection to me. So,
Absolutely. I think you're spot on there, David, and that's how I experience it as well. And certainly I can create an avatar and give it its own
yeah,
backstory, and
yeah,
that can be a real thing, but it's still just not relatable. And for me, other people may feel differently. And again, maybe that shifts over time with generations, but we talk about this epidemic of loneliness that people experience, especially like being in a virtual space sometimes. I will be curious could AI help with that potentially? Right? Could if somebody is lonely or struggling with something like they pop up some type of conversational AI and have a conversation with it. I think that would be fabulous. I don't think that that would be have the same impact as a human interaction, but maybe it's that good in between ground, right? That I'm not able to have that human interaction right now, but I'm using this as a way to maybe get by or augment that until I'm able to connect with somebody.
yeah. I actually think it might be a good practice. So the way I relate to that is, was it this week, last week, recently? I think China just had their robot Olympic demo where they're trying to play basketball or they're trying to, do boxing. And so it's still clunky right now, but in bridging kind of AI robotics and another person, this is how I envision it in the fight world, where there will be a market for a person to train with a robot and they could just beat it up. They could learn, they could, how to leverage, weight in different capacities to eventually be ready to interact with another person. So maybe with the loneliness epidemic, we do the same thing where we create these artificial friends so individuals get more comfortable in, okay, what's a good approach in building a friendship? Get feedback from AI so that way when the real or when a person actually comes into the world, they have the skills and experience to be able to do that. Do you think that's a reality? Do you think I'm off there? What are your thoughts there?
No, I could definitely see that as a
Okay.
reality. So, to the point of maybe it's something physical, maybe it's just studying,
Yeah.
for example, or learning something, the example I gave previously. So, I could see potentially some type of bot helping us with that. Maybe in the future, we would. Is there a world where we do want to watch like
Yeah.
they have those like things where people build machines and like the machines fight with each other,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
people are
Yeah.
still controlling those,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
there's still like a person behind that. So I don't know what the future of that would look like. And here's something I don't know how familiar you are. I'm not familiar. Like I know of it vaguely, but this idea of like the metaverse, right? Where you're able to
Hmm.
like put on the goggles and you have it like an avatar and you have interactions in that world. And I believe at one time there was this thought that this is really going to be the future and people are going to be so excited about this. But from my understanding, it hasn't gained as much traction as maybe we thought it would. And because it's not like that authentic interactions, but kind of curious, I'm speaking a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
out of my area of expertise. Are you very familiar with that?
Well, not too familiar, but I've also heard similar things where the metaverse didn't take off the way we all thought it would. No Ready Player One, in real
Hmm.
life. But I think so. This is me kind of unpacking this in real time. it was too big of a jump, too big of a leap to go all in into the metaverse. I think Meta recognized that. They took a step back. And so the approach I think they're now taking is, okay, we have reality. Rather than jumping into a completely virtual reality, what's the bridge between that? And so that's why they have reality, but they're layering in their Meta glasses on top of it. I think once people get comfortable with that, then they'll be comfortable making that transition. I think it was too big of a jump from actual reality to virtual reality, but with actual reality, with augmented reality, I think that's a good go between. And from what I've seen, they're doing pretty successful with those meta classes. And they're pretty slick, if I do say so myself. Have you had a chance to play with them at all?
I think I have seen those, and maybe Ray-Ban has
Yeah,
something
yeah, yeah, yeah.
similar also, or maybe Ray-Ban uses the Meta technology. I don't really know. I have seen people use them as well. Here's what I do know. We are we're not so great at like predicting trends into
Yeah,
the
yeah,
future, right? Like we think like, oh, this is going to be the thing. I always have to chuckle a little bit when I watch movies like from the 80s and 90s and they're
yeah,
like 2025 and there's
yeah,
like flying
yeah,
cars and like robots doing all of these things. And I still want my flying car, right? Like if that's
yeah,
what we're going to invest some technology in, give me my flying car. That's what I really want. But I say that to say we kind of have this idea of what the future might look like and how technology will develop. I would love to 20 years from now pop this podcast episode open
yeah.
and either be like, man, David and I, we were sages and we knew exactly
Yeah,
where we
yeah,
were headed, or yeah, we did not know quite what we were talking about. But back to this idea of like, that's what it is to be human. We have this
yeah.
conversation, we think about things, we have ideas, and maybe they come to fruition, maybe they don't. But wow, isn't it fun to like get curious and have a conversation about it?
Yeah, I dig it 100%. So, Brandon, we talked about a whole lot of things today. We talked about leadership in AI. We talked about leaders primarily focusing on task versus relationship. We talked about the difference between a leader and a manager. We talked about potentially how we can incorporate AI into leadership best practices. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about today when it comes to either leadership, AI, or how they interact with one another?
I think we kind of hit it, David.
I think
I
so
would
too.
just encourage people to think about. I know AI can seem a little bit intimidating, but wow, there's so much potential here, and we've talked about it. What would it do to help us do more meaningful work? Maybe we're able to work on things we're passionate about. Maybe we have a shorter work week. So,
Yeah,
really embracing the possibility. I understand that there's that thread of trepidation that we all have, but I think we have a really great opportunity and really great possibility. David, I appreciate your
yeah.
time. This has been a super engaging conversation, so I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. And if people wanted to connect with you or learn more about you, where'd you recommend they go?
Yeah, they can check me out on LinkedIn. I can give you, I think you can probably post in the show notes my
Yeah,
LinkedIn channel. People can pop. I'm pretty active and I love to just connect and chat. So if people would love to connect to me, they can connect on LinkedIn.
awesome. Well, this was a great conversation, Brandon. Thank you for joining me. You have a good one.
You too. Thanks, David.